a sword day, a red day, and the sun rises!
Hey guys, this is DCHL Devin here, and welcome to another How to Play video. And this time we talk about the highly anticipated Rohan. And in these videos, I'm going to go ahead and talk to you about the pros and cons as well as how to play this army. Rohan is an absolutely fantastic range, and for anyone who's seen the movies, a lot of people are really looking forward to using them, especially after the Battle of Minas Tirith. This battle really showcased their cavalry army, and you'd expect that their cavalry army are an absolute must pick for this force. And you would be correct. Regarding pros in this army, they have an absolutely versatile cavalry. And by versatile cavalry, I mean that they can do pretty much almost anything you really need them to do. First off, it must be mentioned that they have a 100% bow limit, which means that the entire cav force can be fielded with bows without a problem. They never really count toward anything. So you can easily shoot, and as you can imagine, do a lot of hit and run tactics with this army. Also, their throwing weapons are longer range than anyone else's throwing weapons in the game. While this isn't a strictly uniquely Rohan ability, it is a weapon, the throwing spear, that is given only to Rohan and Warg Riders. Now, Warg Riders have a pretty bad shoot value, and not many people are really going to use them for their throwing spears. However, Rohan, with a pretty respectable 4-up shoot value, can pretty much take advantage of this. So therefore, you can really stand at range and use the 8-inch throwing weapon rather than 6-inch, which would allow you to be recharged. So other than that, they have some pretty good other cavalry as far as the Sons of Errol, where they have an extremely hard-hitting elite cav. This cav model has 2 attacks, strength 4, and on the charge you can imagine that is extremely devastating. Not to mention they're armed with axes, therefore they get the piercing strike bonus if they need it. So these guys are really, really hard-hitting. And even as an alternative elite cav, they have the Outriders. The Outriders honestly don't care about being around one of your allied heroes. Most people keep Outriders around heroes, or any type of cav around heroes, for the heroic moves. But Outriders are meant to sit on the sides. And with their ability to automatically pass their courage test, regardless of the range of a hero when using Standfast, that means that when your force is broken, they're still going to stick around to the end of the match, regardless of how far outstretched they are. This is pretty unique amongst Rohan. Now, regarding the Outriders, that pretty much brings me to my next point, which is if you're going to field archers in the Rohan army, then really the Outriders are your best bet. Point for point, they're pretty much just the best option for you to pick, which means that your archers also don't really need heroes. You have a pretty good shoot value compared to most, but the best part is you can outstretch them anywhere you need them to go. This is awesome for capturing objectives or doing certain missions where it requires you to split your force all over the place. You know that your army will not need heroes in order to operate. Now, as far as the units for Rohan go, there isn't too many. As you'd expect, it's mostly just a cav army, with maybe one more elite that I've left out, the Rohan Royal Guard, which isn't played as often, but can be mentioned as a just a cav model that has the bodyguard ability. Pretty good for charging trolls if you need them to get into there. But regardless of their units, it's their heroes that actually really help them quite a bit. The first and most important that must be mentioned is Rohan Brand. There is no Rohan force that should go without this model. It is pretty much one of the few must-picks within the Lord of the Rings range. Rohan Brand grants a +2 courage bonus to all of your cav models. To anybody, I'm sorry, it's a Warhorn, so effectively it gives it to your entire force and even your allied forces if need be. This is an absolute must-pick. Rohan Brand is perfect for a force. And not to mention also that you need Gambling in your force. Gambling is a hero and one of the only 2 in the game that grants your heroes might once again. Now, in a cav force, This is incredibly important because remember that if you don't get the priority in close combat, you will not get your charge bonuses. Gambling can help ensure that you constantly are able to at least at minimum challenge the opponent whenever they get priority over you. This is really important. You always have might if you bring down to 0. So the best bet is to do those massive charges, call heroic fights, and charge in and renew your might. The last thing I need to mention about this army is the fact that as far as men go, most men or men of the West are only strength 3 at best unless they have heroes. This is actually an exception within Rohan. Rohan can get strength 4 men pretty easily. As long as they field Grimbold, you can get the dreaded Helmingas. Now, here's the thing about strength 4 with men. Rohan notoriously has axes. So you can even do Piercing Strike in order to really get a hard-hitting Rohan force. So this is actually a really great advantage with Rohan, especially coupled in the fact that really much the entire army can get throwing spears. Throwing spears adds incredible range to your army because remember, they are 8 inches, not 6. So therefore, you can throw them well outside of charge range without an issue, forcing your opponent to come to you and meet you on your terms. Now, of course, with all these advantages, we really must mention the cons of Rohan. And the first thing I have to say is there's no real specialization within the army. Now, you might be wondering, okay, wait a minute, what about their cavalry? Certainly, they have the best cavalry in the game, being that they're Rohan. Well, unfortunately, this is kind of arguable. When it comes to charging, Harad Cav kind of do it better. They have lances, which is something that is really missing from the Rohan force. Lances are really, really great for a hard-hitting force, and not to mention Harad Cav are actually cheaper. So, while Rohan is kind of more of a jack of all trades in the sense of their cav, they don't really do anything particular very well. I even have to add, yeah, sure, they're a hit-and-run army, but as far as shooting goes, Elven Cav, once again, do it better. So they're kind of just in between a lot of different armies as far as what they do. So, and also, when we mention their heroes, yes, we can mention the great heroes such as Rohan Brand and Gambling, but then we got to really mention the subpar heroes such as Theoden and maybe Hama. The thing is, a lot of Rohan heroes don't really do anything. They're kind of there in the sense of fluff and sort of need to be there, but in this game of heroes where you're expecting heroic acts and all kinds of really, really crazy feats, you're left with an army that can only really utilize half its hero options if it wants to do anything spectacular. Another problem with Rohan is no monsters, magic, or siege weapons. They have really no hard hitters. And by hard hitters, I'm really talking about just those things that have like strength 8, strength 7, or even just deal a massive amount of damage. Rohan has none of it. Rohan has no capability to deal more than strength 4. And, I mean, we have to mention this as a weakness when we compare them to other armies. So, I mean, other than the Helmingas, which can do the Piercing Strike with Strength 4, you have nothing. And lastly, we have to say that these guys are really, really weak to monsters themselves. Remember, this is pretty much an all-cav force, so anything that knocks you down is really, really detrimental to your army. So this is an army for expert players only, preferably. Sorcerous Blast, Panic Steed, Tremor, anything that knocks you down will cause problems. They can dismount your entire cav force, and there's no way to get back onto your horses. Monsters using the Hurl's brutal power attack will completely devastate you. You cannot afford to lose a single fight against a monster army. So, I mean, realistically, this causes some serious blows to Rohan when one of your main advantages can be taken out just due to a well-placed hurl. So, I mean, this is a very, very bad weakness. Lastly, actually, I have to mention one other thing, is the fact that accuracy penalties introduced in The Hobbit actually really hurt this army. Remember that Rohan functions as a hit-and-run army. Even its infantry like to utilize its throwing spears in order to really harass the opponent. So when you're talking about a lot of shooting like this, Having an accuracy penalty that actually penalizes you for moving is a serious problem. You're going to be hitting on 5-ups rather than 4-ups almost most of the game, and that's just not a really good shooting value if you want to try to whittle out your opponent. Unfortunately, Rohan is an army of patience. It really needs to pick its fights well, and this is why I don't recommend it for a beginning player. Ultimately, if you fail to do what you wanted to do, you will be punished for it. This is not a very forgiving army, and Cav armies almost never are. Now, as far as how to play this army, there's really only 3 ways. There isn't too many unit options that allow you a plethora of things like Harad or Mordor. So you're pretty much playing this exactly one of 3 ways. The first and most common is the Cavalry Hit and Run. Now, although this can be done with infantry, it's obvious more that cavalry have a faster move speed and hence can utilize it better. The Cav Hit and Run is basically you're throwing your throwing spears and shooting your bows at an opponent to whittle down their most important things, or at least their numbers at very minimum. With your fast speed and an entire Cav army that can field bows, this really isn't a problem for Rohan at all. It's actually more of a problem with any other army, including elves and Harad. So the thing you want to do with these guys is to keep maneuvering around the field. It's obviously important to measure. With Rohan, measuring is very, very important. If you mismeasure, then the opponent will manage to charge you. And this will be really bad because it will start to bog you down and put you in situations where you have to choose to just abandon troops in order to continue your hit and run tactics. So this is probably the most popular Rohan strategy and the one you'll see used most often. The second strategy that you often see in Rohan is the shield wall. Now, their shield wall functions quite a bit differently from most in the fact that they don't have spears. So you're only fighting with the front line. Now, you mostly see this problem with dwarves. The thing about dwarves, though, is that they can take a beating. So a lot of times they're just going to stand there and take punishment while their main heroes go out and slaughter. Well, Rohan doesn't exactly have this advantage. So a lot of times, one of the most common tactics you'll see is Rohan shielding all the time, and then the next priority, charging while throwing their throwing spears, hoping that they kill the enemy. This tactic was a little bit more viable back before The Hobbit introduced its accuracy penalties for moving, but it's still effective today. It can work. Nowadays, though, I'd highly recommend using the Helmingas, who will give you the strength 4 and piercing strikes that you need. You can use the back ranks to shoot over the shoulder in order to drag the enemy towards you. And as far as what units you should use, I mean, you only really have 2 options, either Royal Guard or Warriors of Rohan. So obviously you use the Warriors of Rohan in order to be able to upgrade to the Helmingas. The final is just a single Rohan Charge. Now this is probably the one that most anyone's going to want to do, especially from the movies. It doesn't work quite as well as movies. It's not like you're ripping and tearing through an opponent. But if you really want to get that kind of effect, then I'd say you want to stack up on Sons of Earl. Sons of Earl are able to really crush through most of what they impact. Not only that, but the Rohan Royal Guard should be utilized in order to charge monsters. And in this, you're really going to want your heroes. They are the Rohan Royal Charge. What you want to do is burn all your might. I mean, just absolutely use every heroic fight and crush through. Make maximum impact. Remember, with your fast speed, you're going to be able to dictate the fights on the first turn. You want to call heroic fights and chain link them so you jump into other fights and keep moving about and destroying your opponent all as much as possible in one single turn, because you may not get that priority in the next turn. However, the best part about burning all your might with Rohan is that Gambling can give it back. He can give back that might to those heroes that really extended a lot of effort to destroy the opposing force. Alright guys, so now that we've gone through the how to play part of the video, now we're going to go to the how to buy. Now in this part of the video, I try to help you buy this army for $100 or less. And as many of you know, there are many options to get Rohan on eBay or anywhere else. Rohan is an extremely popular force to kind of see circulating around. The reason why is because it's been available since the 2nd edition of Lord of the Rings. But as many of you know, I try to avoid going on third-party sites like eBay because the prices and the availability fluctuate. And everyone knows, yes, if you want to get discounts, you go on eBay. Also, if you want to go on stuff like Perry Miniatures, Dark Ages, or anything else like that, yes, of course, you might find some alternatives. Obviously, if you find some Anglo-Saxon or Norman or Viking-looking units, you're going to find some stuff that is pretty similar to Rohan if you don't mind the aesthetic. But for this part of my video, I generally like to focus on only Games Workshop. We're all buying this product from Games Workshop after all, and it's best to support the Hobbit hobby as much as possible. The more Games Workshop sees sales, the more they support the game. So, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to buy this army for under $100 with only Rohan from Lord of the Rings range in Games Workshop. Now, obviously, there's two parts of this army that people want to make. Two sides of this army, I'm sorry. There's the mounted side, and then there's the dismounted side. Now, if you're going to play Rohan, of course, everyone's going to want the mounted one. But to be honest, this is not very easy. Riders of Rohan will cost you $30. Now, for those of you living in other countries, you can translate this pretty easily. They're a little more expensive than your infantry counterparts. And you're going to really want heroes, but you're going to have to stay away from guys like Rohan Brand, whom, although you really, really want them for your army, they certainly cost more for some reason than some of the other options. If you compare Rohan Brand to, let's say, Éomer foot and mounted, the price is kind of weird. It's obviously based off of their profile in the game rather than the actual cost to produce, which is, of course, kind of similar to what we're used to in Games Workshop. So in this, I'd recommend Gambling. Gambling is sort of a perfect blend. He not only gives you a banner where you can use him as a normal banner, and he has a pretty beautiful one at that, but also he's pretty cheap compared to many of the other heroes. At only $25, he's pretty affordable. So we'll go ahead and start with him, or if you're really, really willing to proxy, you can do the regular standard bearer. Now remember, of course, that many tournaments won't accept this, but if you're trying to afford an army for under $100, my assumption here is that you're not going for tournaments anyway. So now, moving on from Gambling, the actual hero unit, I would actually pick a mounted captain at $20, which would bring you pretty much at $45 or $40 if you did the Rohan banner bearer, and then fill it up with riders pretty much from there. You're only going to get 2 boxes, but they can be led by their respective captains. This won't give you many points, but it would start the game for you, which is pretty much all that's necessary. Now, the real problem with this build is that it gives nothing for infantry. So when you get an infantry model, you're going to have to really proxy some stuff. Now, if you're willing to get away from the mounted force, or maybe do a hybrid of both, then you're able to save a little bit more money than you're normally going to do with an all-mounted force. So let's say if you just want to do all infantry, in my opinion, the obvious choice is Rohan Royal Guard as a captain unit, and then fill up the rest of the ranks with warriors. You can even use Grimbold instead, and maybe paint 2 of the warriors a little bit different and make them captain models. So this wouldn't be too difficult. Once again, probably not going to be able to be used in a tournament of your local tournament, but it's a really good starter force if you just kind of want to get into the game. I think the Rohan Royal Guard really lend to this very well. Now let's say you want Grimbold, but you actually want 2 other unique captain models to kind of fill as your, the captain role. Well, the ones I'd actually recommend are Dunelendings from the Isengard force. Not only do they look like that Anglo-Saxon unit, but they kind of look just different enough from the regular Rohan warriors that they would serve as pretty functional captains, and at a pretty cheap cost too. So this is absolutely something I'd recommend. Now, the best part is, even if you decided to go with this option of Rohan Royal Guard, Dunelendings, or Grimbold, you can do 2 warriors and then 1 pack of Rohan Cav instead. That would allow you to have kind of a mixture hybrid, which I'd actually recommend as a starter army. So it'll kind of get you into the game, kind of get you to understand the game, and you can proxy as you need. Remember, this is just how to buy it for as cheaply as possible. So hopefully you guys got something from this video. Let me know what you guys think of Rohan. So that's it for my how to play and how to buy video. Hopefully you guys gained something from this. If you have any advice or any input and things that I should have added or would like to see in the next video, definitely let me know in the comment section below. And until next time, thanks for watching.